You are not broken. You are becoming. And this, perhaps, is where the story of self-actualization begins. Not with achievement, or clarity, or even understanding, but with the faint recognition that there is something more to grow into. A shape beneath the surface. A whisper that says, you are meant to become yourself, more fully, more deeply, more freely. But what does that mean, really? The term self-actualization was popularized by psychologist Abraham Maslow in the mid-20th century, a time when psychology was turning its gaze away from illness and toward potential. Maslow proposed a hierarchy, a pyramid of needs, and at its peak was this mysterious concept, self-actualization, the realization of one's full self, not perfection, not bliss, but the ongoing fulfillment of one's true nature, the deep and quiet unfolding of who you already are, beneath conditioning, beyond fear, beyond survival. Tonight, in this stillness, we begin to explore that climb, not as a frantic race to the top of the mountain, but as a slow walk through fog, where every step reveals a little more of the path, and every pause becomes a kind of prayer. Let's begin at the base. Maslow believed that no human can truly focus on higher growth until certain foundations are met. He spoke first of physiological needs, the breath you take now, the bed beneath you, the water, the food. Then came safety, belonging, and esteem, each forming a layer upon which something higher might rest. But self-actualization is not simply the next rung on a ladder. It is not reserved for the privileged or the exceptional. It is a process that begins the moment you feel the pull toward authenticity, a curiosity about your own interior life, a desire to not just exist, but to express. And in this process, the questions shift. Not, what should I be doing? But, who am I when I am most myself? Not, how do I fit in? But, how do I align with my own values? Not, what do others expect of me? But, what do I feel most called to create, to become, to live? These are not questions with quick answers. They unfold in layers, in seasons, in silence. They are the kind of questions that visit you in the dark, maybe even now, as you lie here, letting your body settle into softness. Self-actualization is not a destination. It is a way of being, and that way is slow, and kind, and filled with mystery. In the coming segments, we will explore this idea from many sides. We'll examine how self-actualization touches our creativity, our relationships, our purpose, our past. We'll speak softly about what it means to live a life that is whole, not perfect, but true. For now, rest here. Let the thought of climbing fade. Let there be no goal, no pressure, no rush. Let the question, who am I becoming, sit quietly beside you, like a companion, not a challenge. You are not late. You are not behind. You are exactly where this journey begins. Asterisk, before it was named by modern psychologists. Before Maslow drew pyramids, or science traced neural patterns, the idea of becoming one's full self, of actualizing the quiet potential sleeping within, was already old. It traveled through temples and mountain paths, flickered in the firelight of philosophers, whispered in prayer beads, and etched itself into ink across ancient pages. What we call self-actualization is not new. It is a question humanity has carried across centuries, across oceans and deserts and empires. A soft, universal longing. Who am I meant to be? Let us walk backward now, not to escape the present, but to see how deeply this longing is rooted in human soil. In ancient Greece, more than 2,000 years ago, the Oracle of Delphi inscribed 2 words at the entrance to the sacred temple. Know thyself. Not conquer, not survive, not obey, but know. This single phrase became the cornerstone of classical philosophy. To the Greeks, particularly thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and later Aristotle, the journey of life was a journey inward. They did not speak of self-actualization in the words we now use, but their entire view of ethics and flourishing, what they called eudaimonia, was built around the idea that the highest life is one in which the soul expresses its truest nature. For Aristotle, each person was born with a telos, a natural end, a purpose folded into their being. A seed was meant to become a tree, a sculptor, to sculpt, a kind person, to act with kindness. Fulfillment came not from wealth or status, but from living in alignment with that inborn truth. And the path toward that alignment was not paved with pleasure alone, but with virtue, the daily practice of character, of truthfulness, courage, patience, humility. These ideas formed a lineage that would echo forward through Stoicism, the philosophy of Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius. These men, living under Roman rule, spoke often of the self not as a thing to be built, but as a thing to be revealed by surrendering illusion, desire, and fear. The Stoic ideal was not wealth or fame, it was peaceful inner alignment, even in the face of suffering, and far away. Across the mountains of the Himalayas and the plains of the Ganges, other seekers were asking similar questions, but in entirely different ways. In India, over 2,500 years ago, the sages of the Upanishad spoke of Atman, the innermost self, and its unity with Brahman, the infinite. To realize this truth, to awaken from the illusion of separation, was the highest aim of human life. It was not about achieving something, but realizing what you already are beneath the masks and mental noise. Later, the teachings of Buddha would reshape this landscape. He did not speak of an eternal self, but of awakening, of freeing the mind from craving, from false identity, from clinging. The goal was nirvana, not annihilation, but liberation, a peace so full that the need to grasp or fear disappears. In that space, the illusion of ego dissolves, and only clarity remains. Though the language differs, can you feel the resonance, a letting go, a return, an uncovering of the real beneath the roles? In Taoism, emerging in ancient China, the sage, Laozi, offered a vision of life that flows like water. The Tao, the way, cannot be grasped with logic or controlled with effort. It is lived by alignment, not ambition. The Tao does nothing, wrote Laozi, yet nothing is left undone. This paradox is central. To become oneself is not to strain, but to surrender into one's nature. A tree does not force itself to grow. It simply reaches, steadily, toward what nourishes it. And in doing so, it becomes itself effortlessly, fully. So to the human spirit, in Taoist thought. The more we resist the flow of life, try to be what we are not, cling to false identity, obsess over outcomes, the more we suffer. But when we yield, when we trust, when we listen, we become like the bamboo, flexible, resilient, and real. Even in the Abrahamic traditions, we find echoes of this journey. In Judaism, the idea of tikkun olam, repairing the world, is tied to each individual's moral and spiritual unfolding. In Christianity, there is the concept of sanctification, becoming more aligned with divine love, not by striving, but by surrendering the ego. In Islam, the Sufi mystics speak of fana, the dissolving of the self into divine presence, a state of wholeness and union, across continents, across centuries. The theme repeats: the human being is not finished at birth. Life is not merely about survival, or conformity, or productivity. It is a slow, sacred unfolding, a pilgrimage, inward, and then outward again, changed. And though the terms differ, eudaimonia, awakening, Tao, sanctification, liberation, the destination, feels familiar. Not something we chase, but something we remember. Even indigenous cultures have long recognized this. Among many First Nations peoples, the journey of life is understood in cycles. The self is not a straight line, but a circle: birth, youth, maturity, elderhood, and return. Elders are not just old, they are whole. People who have made peace with themselves, with others, with the land. To become an elder is not a matter of years. It is a matter of integration. All of these paths point in the same quiet direction. Not upward, not outward, but inward. Toward the center. Toward home. And in the 20th century, thinkers like Carl Jung would give this a new language. Jung spoke of individuation, the process by which a person integrates all the parts of themselves, both light and shadow, conscious and unconscious. He believed that self-actualization is not about becoming good, or successful, or even happy, but about becoming whole. the wholeness that comes from embracing our contradictions, the shadow and the light, the wounded child and the wise elder, the joy and the grief, self-actualization, then, is not about rising above human life. It is about falling fully into it, about accepting the mesinsis, the mystery, and emerging more real, tonight. As you lie in your own stillness, know this: you are not starting something new. You are continuing a very old, very human journey. A path walked by sages and shepherds, queens and monks, warriors and artists. A path that lives inside you, not just as potential, but as birthright. Let your breath be soft now. Let your body feel the weight of all this lineage. You are not alone. You never were, and though your path is your own, utterly unique, shaped by your choices, your stories, your hopes, it is held within something larger, something sacred. It is easy, sometimes, to think that self-actualization belongs to monks in monasteries, to poets in mountain huts, to saints who speak in metaphors and live beyond the ordinary. But this is not true. Self-actualization is not separate from ordinary life. In fact, it is most visible there in the small, unnoticed gestures of daily living. It is not a lightning strike. It is not the summit of a far-off mountain. It is, more often, the quiet glow of the kitchen light in the early morning, the way someone ties their shoes, the care with which a person waters a plant they have grown for years. In truth, self-actualization does not demand we escape our lives. It invites us to fully inhabit them. Abraham Maslow, who coined the term, believed this deeply. He once wrote that self-actualized people were not necessarily those who had transcended the world, but those who had become deeply rooted in it, who moved through life with presence, with integrity, with a sense of gratitude for the simple dot. So, let us, together, turn our gaze not upward, but inward and around, to the textures and rhythms of everyday life, where the seeds of becoming are quietly planted. Let us begin with work, not career, not fame, just work, the offering of one's energy to the world in some form. For some, this might mean teaching. For others, repairing cars, raising children, writing code, baking bread, cleaning hallways, or painting ceilings. The shape of the work does not define the self, but the way one does it. That is where self-actualization begins to shimmer. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi described a state called flow, a condition where one becomes so immersed in a task that time disappears, the ego quiets, and the act becomes its own reward. In flow, we are not working to finish. We are working to be, to express, and in those moments, we are often closest to our true selves. Actualized people, Maslow observed, are often found in this state, not driven by external praise or promotion, but by a deep joy in the doing. They find meaning in their actions, even in the mundane. They see value where others might see routine, and in this, they align themselves not just with their goals, but with life itself. Now let us turn to relationships. Another fertile ground for becoming self-actualization does not require solitude. In fact, some of the most profound actualization occurs in the presence of others, especially when those relationships are honest, supportive, and spacious. Maslow noted that actualized individuals tend to form deep connections, not many, but few relationships grounded not in need or image, but in truth. They are not interested in manipulating others, or in being what they are not, to gain approval. They allow others to be themselves, and they ask for the same dot in conversation. They listen more than they speak. They are capable of profound empathy, not because they are soft, but because they are centered. Their ego is not brittle. They do not need to be right. They are willing to learn. And when conflict arises, as it does in all real relationships, they do not collapse or explode. They remain curious. They are able to step back and ask, what is this revealing? What needs to be understood, not controlled? Self-actualization, then, is not about being loved by all. It is about loving well, with clarity, with respect, without losing oneself in the process. What about solitude? Yes, here too, the path deepens. The ability to be alone without being lonely. This is a quiet hallmark of the self-actualized. They do not need noise or distraction to feel whole. They can sit with their own thoughts, not because those thoughts are always kind or easy, but because they are not afraid of them. In solitude, they reflect, they create, they rest, they restore. Think of a potter alone in a studio, a gardener in the early morning, a writer before dawn, a man walking without headphones, a woman breathing in a sunbeam. These are not dramatic moments, but they are sacred, because in them, the self is allowed to rise without interruption. And in that rising, something aligns there is, to the question of values. What matters most? This is not always answered with certainty. But the self-actualized do not live by default. They do not simply follow, they reflect, they revise. They ask, is this still true for me? Their actions come not from habit or fear of judgment, but from congruence, an inner alignment between what they believe, what they feel, and what they do. If they value compassion, they live it, not loudly, but consistently. If they value honesty, they speak it, even when it is hard. If they value creativity, they make space for it, not only in their art, but in their way of thinking. And because of this alignment, they move through the world with a kind of ease. Not that life is easy, but that they are not at war with themselves. This is one of the most beautiful qualities of self-actualization, the absence of inner conflict. Not because the person has no flaws or contradictions, but because they have made peace with them. They understand themselves, and in understanding, they loosen the grip of shame. Even in crisis, the actualized respond differently. They do not panic. They do not collapse into helplessness. They feel the weight of the world, perhaps more deeply than others, but they do not let it crush them. Instead, they ask, what is mine to do here? They do not try to fix everything, but they do not turn away. They contribute. They care. They hold space, because to be self-actualized is not to be distant from the world. It is to be deeply of it, deeply committed to it, but without being consumed by it. They are the calm in the storm, the anchor, the voice that reminds others, you are not alone, we will find our way. And what of joy? Yes, joy is not absent here. In fact, it is more present than in the lives of many. Not the joy of thrill or conquest, but the quiet joy of being, of watching the sun move through leaves, of holding someone's hand, of finishing a task, of hearing a bird and remembering a childhood moment. The self-actualized are often childlike in their capacity for wonder. They are unashamed to be delighted. They laugh. They notice. They are not dulled by routine. They are made new by it. So you see, self-actualization is not always grand. It is the teacher who stays late to help, the baker who whistles while kneading dough, the friend who listens without waiting to reply, the father who apologizes, the artist who paints what no one will see, the woman who walks into a room and does not shrink, the man who cries and is not ashamed, the elder who smiles at the child and remembers everything. It is not a performance, it is a presence, and it is available to you right now, in this moment. Even as you rest, you do not need to become someone else. You only need to let go, gently, gradually, of who you are not. Let your breath be soft again. Let your shoulders rest where they are. Let your thoughts slow, like river stones settling to the bottom. You are already on the path. There is a part of you, small, silent, still watching, who remembers. Before there were goals, before there were deadlines, before the names you were given, and the rules you were taught. This part remembers not just what happened, but how it felt to be alive in a world that was still new. It remembers wonder. It remembers fear. It remembers what it longed for and what it lost. Tonight, we return to that part. Not to analyze, not to critique, but simply to meet it with gentleness, and maybe with a kind of reverence. For in this early part of your life lies something essential. The raw material of the self, the clay from which your becoming first began to take shape. If self-actualization is the process of becoming who we truly are, then we must first ask, who were we before we forgot? Psychologists often speak of the inner child, a term that sounds whimsical, but is rooted in deep psychological truth. Your inner child is not imaginary. It is a living presence within your psyche, the emotional memory of your earliest self. still shaping how you feel, how you connect, how you move through the world. This child does not grow old. It simply recedes, if unacknowledged. And yet it colors everything. Your joy, your intimacy, your trust, your pain. To reclaim this child is not to regress. It is to heal the foundation of your adult self, to make room, once again, for wonder, vulnerability, and play, but also to listen to the grief that was once too large to name. Let us step gently into that forgotten garden. Imagine your earliest memory, not the event, but the feeling. Were you safe? Were you seen? Did you know where the edges of the world were, or did they shift beneath your feet? Many of us carry early wounds, not because someone meant to hurt us, but because we were small, and the world was large, and sometimes no one was there to explain what was happening. A look, a tone of voice, a silence, a door that closed. 2. A child. These are not background noise. They are the world. And from them, we begin to form stories. Stories about who we are, what we are worth, what we must do to be loved, to be safe, to belong. These stories become schemas, deeply embedded, patterns of thought and emotion. They shape how we interpret experience. And though they may be outdated, they linger. Like ghosts in an old house, they whisper. And so, part of self-actualization is this: learning to recognize the voices that aren't yours. The ones you inherited, absorbed, adopted. The ones that once helped you survive, but now only keep you small. A child, told to be quiet, may become an adult who cannot speak their needs. A child told they are responsible for others' emotions may become an adult who overextends. A child taught to perform for praise may become an adult who never rests, who never feels enough. None of this is your fault, and none of it is fixed, because healing is possible, even now. Even here, there is a concept in narrative therapy called real. It suggests that your life is not a single story, but many stories. Some were told about you, others you told yourself, and some are still waiting to be written. In this process, you do not erase the past. You do not pretend it didn't happen. You acknowledge it fully, compassionately, and then you begin to ask, is there a new way to tell this story? A kinder way, a truer way. The child in you does not need you to fix everything. They simply need you to come back for them, to listen, to protect, to say you didn't deserve that. You were doing your best. You are safe now. I am here. And when that child feels safe again, even just a little, something extraordinary happens. Your joy begins to return. Your creativity stirs. Your defenses soften. You begin to trust, not just others, but yourself. Because, at the core of the inner child, is not just pain. There is also radiance, curiosity, imagination, the ability to be present, the ability to play. Play is not frivolous. It is one of the oldest expressions of the self. It is how mammals learn. It is how creativity begins. And somewhere along the way, in systems that demanded productivity, obedience, conformity, many of us were taught to trade, play for performance, but actualization invites us to reclaim what we abandoned, to sing, even if off-key, to dance, even if no one watches, to wonder, to wander, to build sandcastles that will be washed away, and feel joy anyway. The child you once were remembers how, and when you listen, really listen, you begin to remember too. Consider your memories, not as files in a cabinet, but as echoes, living threads that still tug at the corners of your decisions. What did you love most as a child? What did you fear? What were you told was true, that you now question? What did you hide, just to feel safe? These are not small questions. They are the beginning of the trail, and if you follow them gently, without rushing, without judgment, you may find that the self you're trying to become is not so far from the child you once were. There is a soft metaphor, borrowed from Gungian thought, of the garden that was abandoned. In the earliest years of life, this garden blooms wildly with colors, instincts, and dreams. But then come the storms, the frost, the fences built by other people's pain. The child, frightened, leaves, but the garden never dies. It only sleeps, and part of your journey now, tonight, tomorrow, always is to return, slowly, tenderly, to clear the overgrowth, to speak to the soil, to say, I remember you, I see you, I did not forget, and in that act of remembering, the self begins to bloom again. Let us rest now. Before we continue, let your eyes grow heavy. Let your breath return to its soft rhythm. You are not broken. You are becoming, and the child within you is not your past. They are the root of your future. Asterisk, every journey of becoming has its guardians, the invisible forces that seem to rise up just as we begin to change, just as we start to reach for something true. These are not monsters or villains. They do not come from outside. They come from within. And though they may wear the shape of fear, doubt, procrastination, or distraction, their root is not destruction, it is protection. Tonight, we will meet these protectors not as enemies, but as misunderstood allies. We will come to see that what blocks our path may also be what once kept us safe, and what still believes it must. Because the truth is, most of us are not held back by weakness. We are held back by strategies we developed long ago, often in childhood to survive situations where our full selves were not welcome. And now, even in adulthood, even in safety, those patterns remain. Like loyal sentries, they guard the gates to our potential, not to trap us, but to shield us from pain we once could not bear. Let us sit with them, gently. Let us understand, fear is not the enemy. Fear is ancient. It lives in the brain's most primitive structures, the amygdala, the limbic system. These regions evolved, not for joy, but for survival. They scan constantly for threat. And when danger is perceived, they override logic, decision-making, even memory. In early life, this system is particularly active. The child, small and dependent, learns quickly what keeps them safe. Attention, approval, predictability. These become currency. And the absence of these, rejection, unpredictability, chaos is encoded as danger from this. Patterns emerge. The child who was shamed for speaking their truth may grow into an adult who fears self-expression. The child who was praised only for achievement may become the adult who cannot rest. The child who was punished for neediness may become the adult who never asks for help. These responses are not flaws. They are adaptive. They worked. But now they may also limit. And so when we begin to change, when we start to reclaim lost parts of ourselves, to live more authentically, these patterns are triggered. It feels like anxiety, like resistance, like distraction, like sabotage. But beneath these surfaces lies a simpler message. Are you sure it's safe to be you? This is the great paradox of self-actualization, that the parts of us most capable of thriving are often guarded by the parts that once had to survive. The protector and the potential exist side by side, and if we ignore the protector, if we push it away, or try to shame it into silence, it will fight harder. It does not trust us yet. It believes, often with good reason, that being vulnerable is dangerous. So the work is not to destroy the resistance, it is to befriend it. Let us imagine now a simple metaphor. You are standing at the edge of a dense forest. Somewhere beyond the trees lies something you long for. A sense of freedom, truth, integration. But at the threshold, there stands a figure, cloaked in shadow, silent, unmoving. This figure is your resistance, not because it hates you, but because it was once the one who stood guard when no one else would. It kept the danger out. It kept the wounds in. It did what it knew how to do, protect. And now, as you approach this threshold again, it rises, not to block you, but to ask you, are you strong enough yet? Are you ready to walk into what you once had to leave behind? This figure does not yield to force. It yields to understanding. And the moment you stop trying to force your way forward, and instead sit calmly, with curiosity, the figure begins to soften. You begin to speak with it. You ask, what are you afraid will happen if I grow? And it answers. Maybe not in words, maybe in memory, in image, in sensation, but it answers. If you shine, they might leave. If you rest, they might think you're lazy. If you say no, they might stop loving you. If you stop performing, you might disappear. And when you hear this, really hear it, You no longer see an enemy. You see a child's belief, still alive in an adult body. A belief born in confusion, cemented in fear. And now, with compassion, not urgency, you begin the slow process of re-education. You say, I'm not that child anymore. The danger is past. I can protect us now. I am allowed to grow. And slowly, gently, the guardian at the gate begins to step aside. In psychology, this process has many names. Internal family systems, parts work, somatic reparenting, but at its heart, it is simple. It is the act of treating your resistance not as an obstacle, but as a wounded protector who needs inclusion, not exile. Because the truth is, there is no part of you that is against you. There are only parts that are afraid, and fear, when held with patience, can transform. Actualization is not the absence of fear. It is the courage to move with it, not against it. To speak, even if your voice shakes. To rest, even when guilt lingers. To create, even when the outcome is uncertain. To try again, even after failure. To love, even though it hurts. And as you do this, slowly, day by day, something remarkable happens. The resistance lessens. The guardian begins to trust you, because you have become the one it was waiting for. The self strong enough to hold both vulnerability and power. And from this integration, true becoming begins. So tonight, if you feel resistance to sleep, to stillness, to your dreams, do not fight it. Sit with it. Place a gentle hand on your heart and whisper, I see you. Thank you for protecting me. You don't have to stand guard anymore. I'm here now. And in that whisper, you begin to rewrite the story. Let your breath deepen again. Let the silence return. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are becoming. And even your resistance is part of the path. Asterisk, there is a fire inside you. Not a wild blaze. Not a fire of destruction or urgency. But something gentler, a quiet flame, steady and enduring. It is the flame of your imagination, your vision, your power to make something from nothing. This is your creativity. Not a talent, not a hobby, but a language, the way your inner self speaks to the world. The way your deepest knowing comes forward, not through explanation, but through expression. In this segment, we enter the terrain of creation, not only in the arts, but in life itself. Because to actualize the self is to make space for what is uniquely yours, to bring into being. You may not think of yourself as creative. That is common. Many people learned early on that creativity was for others, for painters, musicians, dancers. But the truth is simpler, and far more generous. Creativity is not what you do. It is how you relate to what you do. It is how you cook, how you dress, how you solve problems, how you comfort a friend, how you arrange your home, how you write a letter, how you think when no one is watching. It is your fingerprint on the world. And honoring it, allowing it, is one of the surest signs of becoming who you truly are. Let us begin with the science. Psychologists studying self-actualization have long noted a strong correlation between personal growth and creative behavior. Abraham Maslow, whose name we have returned to throughout this journey, observed that self-actualizing people were almost always creators, not necessarily artists in the traditional sense, but people who engaged the world in original, curious, expressive ways. Maslow even coined the term self-actualizing creativity, a form of creativity that arises not from ambition or desire for recognition, but from a natural, intrinsic urge to express inner truth. This kind of creativity is not competitive. It is not performed. It is playful, spontaneous, intuitive. It arises when you feel safe enough to stop hiding, when your internal world begins to take shape in the external one, not to impress others, but to feel whole. Think of the child drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick, not to sell it, not to perfect it, just to see what happens. Or the elder who hums while knitting. The man who builds birdhouses in his garage, not because anyone asked him to, but because it brings him peace. These are not trivial acts. These are the seeds of meaning. Creativity, when freed from judgment and outcome, becomes medicine. It regulates the nervous system. It calms the mind. It allows emotion to move. And, most importantly, it brings the self into alignment. Thoughts, feelings, and actions converging in the moment of making. There is a passage, often whispered in artistic circles, that we do not make art to be understood, we make it to understand. This is true of all creation. A journal entry can reveal a belief we didn't know we held. A sketch can release tension trapped in the body. A melody hummed, without words, can express sorrow that language could not touch. These acts, though small, are restorative. They bring coherence. And coherence, as we've seen again and again, is the heartbeat of self-actualization. The quiet certainty that who you are inside matches what you bring forth into the world. But what stops us from creating? So often, it is fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of wasting time, of being foolish, of doing it wrong. These fears are not new. Most of them were learned. Somewhere along the way, many were told explicitly or subtly that their creations were not valuable. A teacher's harsh critique, a parent's dismissal, a sibling's laugh, a culture obsessed with polish and product, and so the creative self goes underground, still alive, but hidden, waiting for permission. But that permission will not arrive from outside. It must be offered from within, and it begins not with mastery, but with curiosity. Let us pause here, take a breath. Now ask yourself softly, what would I make if no one ever saw it? A story, a garden, a melody, a meal, a prayer, a new way of doing something old. This is the starting point. Self-actualization asks, not that you be famous, but that you be fully expressed. That something within you is allowed to move outward, not perfectly, but honestly. And from that movement, life begins to feel more vivid, more bearable, more real. Creativity is also how we adapt. It is how we solve problems, how we envision a better way, how we respond to challenges with possibility instead of defeat. In moments of crisis, the self-actualized do not collapse into despair. They pause, they imagine, they innovate. They ask not just what went wrong, but what could be different. This is not positivity. It is not denial. It is agency. It is the ability to engage with life as a co-creator, not just a passenger. And it is one of the clearest markers that someone has stepped into the space of their own becoming. In a world that often encourages consumption over creation, the simple act of making something, anything, becomes an act of resistance, a refusal to be passive, a decision to shape your reality. Even in small ways, it doesn't matter what the result looks like. It matters that you made it, that your energy became form, that your mind met the world with something new. And in that act, the self becomes actual, not in theory, but in texture, in color, in breath. Creativity is also joy, not the explosive kind, but the simmering joy that rises when something inside you says, yes, this is mine. And it can happen anywhere. In the way you arrange your morning, in the way you solve a puzzle, in how you tell a story, or decorate your space, or give a gift. It is not bound to any discipline. It is a way of relating to the world. And once that relation is restored, once the channel is open, something beautiful begins to unfold, slowly, but unmistakably. Your life begins to feel like a work of art. Not because it is perfect, but because it is yours. Let us return to the flame, that quiet, steady warmth within you. You do not need to fan it into a blaze. You do not need to show it to anyone. Just sit with it. Listen to what it wants to create. Trust that it knows the way, not toward perfection, but toward presence. And know this: every act of honest creation is a step on the path to becoming. A thread pulled from the unseen, woven into the visible. And through that weaving, you become not someone else, but more of who you already are. Let your breath deepen. Let your hands relax. Let the silence gather around you like a shawl. You are allowed to make. You are allowed to try. You are allowed to be messy, and beautiful, and new. What happens to time when we begin to become ourselves? What happens to urgency, to pressure, to the ticking clocks that once governed our every hour? In this segment, we step into a different kind of time. One not measured in productivity or efficiency. One not broken into appointments, deadlines, and checkboxes, but instead, a lived time, the kind that breathes with us, that expands and contracts according to presence, not pressure. This is one of the most subtle and profound shifts on the path of self-actualization, the transformation of our relationship to time itself. For most of our lives, we are taught to see time as a scarcity. There is never enough. We are behind. We are racing. We must catch up. We must be better, sooner, do more, faster. There is a list. It is never done. This perception is not accidental. It is reinforced by systems that thrive on urgency. Economic systems, educational systems, even social systems that reward constant motion over stillness. And so we internalize this rhythm. We begin to believe that our worth is tied to our output per hour. That slowness is laziness. That rest is indulgence. That if we are not improving, we are failing. But this is not the rhythm of the soul. It is the rhythm of survival, and self-actualization tenderly begins to question it. Imagine now a clock without hands, a room without deadlines, a breath taken, not in between tasks, but as its own purpose. This is what it feels like to return to presence, to begin living from within, rather than in response to what is expected. Presence is not just mindfulness. It is a way of being in the world that is rooted, embodied, and aware. And when presence becomes your baseline, time begins to reshape itself. Minutes stretch, hours soften. There is no rush, only rhythm. You begin to notice things, the curl of steam from your tea, the texture of fabric under your fingertips, the subtle shift in a loved one's voice. You are here, fully. And from this place, the self emerges, not as a task to be accomplished, but as a being to be inhabited. Philosophers have long explored the idea that time is not objective. The ancient Greeks had two words for it: chronos, the time of clocks and calendars; kairos, the time of the soul, the right moment, the ripe moment, the now that matters. Most of modern life is lived in chronos, but becoming unfolds in kairos. You do not schedule self-actualization. You do not rush it. You enter it. And when you do, you find that some of your most important shifts happen not when you are trying hardest, but when you are simply present, in a conversation that opens something inside you, in a walk where your thoughts untangle, in a pause between breaths where clarity comes unbidden. These moments are not efficient, but they are true, and truth, when it arrives, never checks the time. Let us look at nature. The seed does not bloom on a deadline. The tide does not rush. The tree does not apologize for its pace. There is a rhythm written into all life, and that rhythm includes rest, slowness, and unfolding the self, too. Blooms in seasons, and one of the gifts of self-actualization is learning to trust your season, not the season others are in, not the one society says you should be in, but the one you are in now. Some seasons are for reaching, some are for rooting, some are for shedding, for waiting, for listening. All are necessary, and none are failures. Time changes too, in how we view the past and future, in early stages of growth. The past often holds regret, the future, anxiety. But as we grow into wholeness, the past becomes story, not to haunt us, but to guide us, and the future becomes space, not for panic, but for possibility. We begin to see time, not as a line, but as a spiral. We return, again and again, to old lessons, but from new vantage points. We evolve, not away from our past, but through it. And this spiral teaches us that becoming is not about constant progress. It is about deepening. You may wonder, but what about time's limits? What about the fact that we do grow old? That our bodies will one day soften, still, return to earth? Is this not the greatest urgency? Yes, and no. Death is not the opposite of self-actualizatio. It is its horizon, the line that gives shape to the sky. And those who have actualized deeply often speak of a strange gift, that the closer they come to the end, the more present they become, not because they are rushing to finish something, but because they finally understand life was never the race. It was the being here now, in this breath, in this moment, in this story. Let us pause, let us breathe. You are not behind, you are not late. You are not wasting time by being slow, by being quiet, by simply being. In fact, In this stillness, you are arriving, not at a destination, but at yourself. Tonight, allow time to stretch. Let the clocks fade. Let the lists dissolve. Let presence be enough. Let being here, exactly as you are, be the most honest, most radical act of becoming. And no, this self-actualization does not require a sprint. It asks for returning, again and again, to yourself. And in that return, you will find what was never lost. Your rhythm, your essence, your pace. Asterisk, we do not become ourselves in isolation. The path of self-actualization, though inward by nature, is never solitary in spirit. We find ourselves, often most vividly, in the reflections cast by others. In this segment, we will explore how relationships with family, friends, lovers, even brief encounters, become mirrors. Not always clear, not always gentle, but always instructive. For to truly know the self is not only to sit in stillness, but to see what stirs in us. When we are seen, let us begin with the science of resonance. Psychologically, humans are wired for connection. From the moment of birth, even before, the brain is shaped by the quality of its relationships. The attachment bond between infant and caregiver becomes the template, through which we learn not just how to love, but how to be. Was I safe? Was I heard? Did my needs matter? Was love given freely or earned? Was connection soothing or unpredictable? These early answers are not stored in sentences, but in the nervous system, in the tone of a cry, the reach of a hand, the tension in a chest, and they echo forward into adulthood, often invisibly, shaping how we relate. The fear of abandonment, the compulsive caretaking, the avoidance of intimacy, the hunger to be chosen, the exhaustion of always proving our worth. We learn who we are, not in solitude, but in response to how others responded to us. And yet, this is not the end of the story, it is the beginning. To actualize the self is not to sever connection, it is to refine it, to choose relationships that reflect not the wounds of our past, but the wholeness we are stepping into. This does not mean finding perfect people. It means finding people with whom we can be real. People who challenge us to grow gently, not forcefully. People who can witness our becoming, not fear it. People who can sit in silence with us and still feel close. And most importantly, people who mirror back to us not our shame, but our possibility. There is a metaphor used in many wisdom traditions of the mirror lake. When the water is agitated, the reflection is broken. The self appears distorted. But when the lake is still, we see clearly. Relationships can be like this. Some agitate us, not because they are bad, but because they trigger old waves. We feel unseen, invalidated, reactive. These relationships show us where we still hurt. What parts of us are not yet held with care. Other relationships soothe us. They hold stillness. With these people we feel at ease, not because they complete us, but because they allow us to be whole in their presence. And so the work is not to avoid disturbance, it is to observe. To watch what arises and ask, is this me now, or is this me then? Because every relationship gives us information, not just about others, but about ourselves. Consider the person who frustrates you. Is it truly their behavior? Or does their tone remind you of someone else? Their criticism echoes something old. Their silence awaken a past neglect. These are not signs to flee, they are signs to reflect. Self-actualization asks, what is mine to own here, and what is mine to release? And in doing so, we reclaim something vital. Agency. We stop living as reactions to others. We begin living as responses to ourselves. Now consider love, not the Hollywood kind, not the kind that consumes, but the quiet, steady love that sees you, fully, imperfectly, and still stays. This love is rare, and it is transformative, because in its presence, defenses soften. The nervous system relaxes. Old armor loosens, and the self dares to unfold. You may recognize this in a friend, in a partner, in a mentor, even in a stranger whose gaze held no judgment. These people are not saviors, they are mirrors, reflecting back to you your own light. Let us speak now of conflict. It is easy to think that growth means the absence of friction, but this is not true. Self-actualized. People are not without conflict. They are without pretense in conflict. They speak clearly. They listen deeply. They own their part. They know that disagreement is not disconnection, that rupture can lead to repair, and that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is set a boundary. Boundaries are not walls. They are the architecture of honesty. They say, "This is where I end, and you begin. This is what I need to stay whole." And when two people honor each other's boundaries, not as rejection, but as reverence, a deeper trust forms, one that does not collapse under the weight of difference. Relationships also teach us about our roles. Some of us have always been the fixer, the caregiver, the achiever, the peacekeeper, the quiet one, the funny one, the reliable one. These roles helped us once, but sometimes they become cages. And in new relationships, or as old ones evolve, we may find the courage to step out of them, to say, "I am more than this." And in doing so, we risk being misunderstood, rejected, or even outgrowing those who knew only our mask. But we also open the door to something truer, connection-based, not on performance, but on presence. Let us return now to solitude, because even within relationships, self-actualization requires space. The ability to hear your own voice amidst the chorus. The willingness to disappoint others in order to honor your truth. The understanding that love does not mean merging, it means meeting, again and again. Across the distance of two distinct souls, the poet Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "The point of marriage is not to create a quick union, but to be the guardian of each other's solitude." This, too, is self-actualization. To love without possession, to connect without erasure, to witness another's journey without controlling its direction, and to trust that when two people actualize together, not in tandem, but in parallel, something profound becomes possible. A relationship not of dependence, but of devotion, not of need, but of knowing, not of filling a void, but of walking beside someone who has filled their own. Let your breath deepen once more. Think of someone you love, or once loved. What did they reflect to you? What did you see in their presence? And what of yourself are you now ready to reclaim? Because every relationship, however brief, however painful, has given you something, a mirror, a lesson, a gift. And tonight, perhaps you offer them gratitude, not for perfection, but for reflection. You are not meant to walk this path alone, but you are meant to walk it as yourself. There is, within the human spirit, a dimension often overlooked in the long and winding discussion of personal growth, a dimension dismissed as frivolous, seen as childlike in the diminishing sense of the word, as though lightness has no place in a life dedicated to wisdom or truth. And yet, let us pause here and breathe. What if joy is not a distraction from becoming, but a portal into it? What if playfulness is not regression, but remembrance? What if self-actualization is not only forged in the crucibles of shadow work and silent introspection, but also cultivated in laughter, in awe, in the sacred art of not taking oneself quite so seriously? Tonight, in this segment, we will walk together into that often forgotten garden, the quiet and gleaming terrain of play, not as escapism, but as a spiritual practice, as a state of being where joy is not the enemy of depth, but its most honest companion. It begins, as so many truths do, in childhood, before the world instructed us in shame. Before the curriculum of conformity began its long persuasion, there was play, spontaneous, unscripted, free, the way a child drags a stick through sand without planning what it will become, the way they invent stories with invisible dragons, or create tea parties for stuffed animals, with gravity and sincerity. This was not done for approval, or for outcome, or for productivity. It was done for its own sake, because to be alive was to imagine, to delight, to explore without the burden of being impressive. And though many of us, as adults, have put those toys away, traded fairy wings for spreadsheets and plastic swords, for polite responsibilities, that essence, that playful self, did not die. It waits sometimes in dreams, sometimes in sudden laughter, sometimes in the longing for something we can't name, a return, not to childhood exactly, but to a kind of aliveness that lives just beneath our polished adult surface. Science, too, affirms what the spirit has always known: play is not frivolous. Neurologically, it is foundational. Studies in developmental psychology and neuroscience show that play increases neuroplasticity, enhances creativity, improves emotional regulation, and fosters resilience. In other words, the ability to access joy and lightness isn't merely pleasant. It is protective. Dr. Stuart Brown, founder of the National Institute for Play, has studied play in a wide range of mammals, including humans, and found that those deprived of it, both in childhood and adulthood, show increased levels of aggression, depression, and inflexibility. Play, he argues, is not the opposite of seriousness. It is the root of adaptability. It is how we learn to trust, to improvise, to innovate, and to recover. It is not decorative, it is elemental. Imagine now a life in which your days are not governed solely by duty or performance, but shaped, at least in part, by the gentle tug of curiosity, the soft invitation of joy. Imagine doing something, anything, without needing it to be good, or useful, or shared, just because it lights something inside you. Perhaps it's painting, though. You've never called yourself an artist. Perhaps it's dancing, alone in your room, moving in ways that make you laugh. Perhaps it's building model trains, or rearranging your bookshelf in rainbow order, or writing poems that no one else will ever read. These small, secret pleasures are not distractions from your real work. They are portals into your most essential self. Because in play, we are unguarded. In play, we return to presence. In play, we stop performing and start simply being. And that radical, gentle, unfiltered being is the very heart of self-actualization. The philosopher Alan Watts once said that the point of life was not to reach some final achievement, but to dance, not to arrive at the end of the song, but to enjoy every note as it comes. This metaphor, like all beautiful metaphors, is not just poetic, it is deeply practical. Because when we live only for milestones, only for the next goal, only for the resolution of tension, we are always racing toward the end. But when we begin to live like the child who plays without destination, without agenda, we begin to rediscover the texture of now. And that rediscovery is not trivial. It is in many ways a homecoming in play. There is also healing for many of us. Childhood was not safe. Play may have been interrupted by chaos, by caretakers who demanded maturity too soon, by environments that punished imagination. And so to reclaim play, as an adult, is not just joyful. It is rebellious. It is a declaration that you are no longer living in survival, that you can afford to be soft, to be silly, to be seen in your absurdity, and to love that absurdity, not as a flaw, but as a facet of your wholeness. There is also something deeply social in play. Watch two children who've just met. They don't ask about school or careers or beliefs. They simply begin to play, and through that play, they connect. As adults, we often forget this. We bond through shared stress, shared projects, shared complaints, but shared joy, shared. Lightness can be a deeper thread. A glance across a room when a joke lands, a spontaneous game of cards, a conversation that turns into shared wonder at the moon. These moments build trust, and trust is not only forged in crisis, it can be built in laughter, in surprise, in the low-stakes wonder of just being human together. You may be wondering, how does this relate to actualization? Here is how joy expands the self. It widens the aperture of perception. It lets in more color, more sound, more possibility. And when we are joyful, we become porous, able to receive, to connect, to express without filter. In this state, we are not merely reacting to life, we are co-creating it. And that is what self-actualization ultimately is. Not a state of perfection, but a state of participation, fully, freely, playfully present in your own unfolding. Let us pause. Take a breath. Long, slow, unrushed. What would feel playful to you right now? Even in this stillness, what would delight the younger version of you? Perhaps it is imagining something whimsical. Perhaps it is remembering a moment of laughter. Perhaps it is the smile that forms on your lips as you realize, I am allowed to enjoy this. I am allowed to be whole and light, wise and silly, growing and laughing. I am allowed to dance. Self-actualization does not mean abandoning joy in favor of depth. It means marrying the two. It means laughing in the midst of learning. It means playing your way into wisdom. It means knowing that the playground and the temple are not separate places. They are often the very same ground. You were born with this knowing, and tonight, you are remembering it. Let your breath settle. Let your hands soften. Let your thoughts drift toward joy, not as indulgence, but as invitation. The soul does not speak in bullet points. It speaks in stories, in metaphors, in laughter, and sometimes the most profound thing you can do is laugh freely. Not to distract, but to connect. There is a kind of wisdom embedded in the walls around us. Not the intellectual sort, nor the kind that offers language or advice, but a subtler, almost tactile knowing. A felt sense of how a place holds us, reflects us, and either calls us inward toward our essence, or scatters us outward toward confusion. We do not always realize how profoundly the spaces we inhabit shape our thoughts, our rhythms, our very sense of possibility. But if you pause for a moment and reflect on the last place you felt wholly at ease, or the last space that made you feel small, or restless, or overstimulated, you will begin to glimpse the truth that self-actualization is not merely an internal journey, it is also profoundly spatial. It unfolds in rooms, in corners, in the way light spills across a floor, or how the presence of clutter can crowd not just a room, but the mind itself. Imagine now a room built not for function alone, but for being, not decorated with status, but curated with soul. A space where nothing is hurried, where every object invites rather than demands, where the air carries the soft scent of something remembered. Cedar, perhaps, or lavender, or simply the clean emptiness that comes from open windows and time. Unhurried. The chair is not just for sitting, but for resting. The table is not a surface for tasks, but for tea, for quietness, for books left open to pages that call you back. There are no blinking lights, no cold steel, no stack of unopened mail demanding response. Instead, there is warmth, not always in temperature, but in tone. This room, this imagined space, does not just serve you, it sees you, and that seeing, soft and ambient, allows you to see yourself again. Not as a functionary, but as a being worthy of stillness and space. This is not mere aesthetics. It is not about trends or tidy rooms for their own sake. The science of environmental psychology tells us that our surroundings have measurable effects on our cognition, mood, and even our immune systems. Visual clutter increases cortisol, the stress hormone. Harsh lighting can disrupt circadian rhythms, leading to poor sleep and foggy thinking. Noise pollution, even in the form of appliances, elevates heart rate and can reduce focus. But conversely, soft lighting, warm textures, natural materials, and open layouts can soothe the nervous system, increase alpha-wave brain activity, and foster creativity. In one famous study, patients in hospital rooms with windows facing nature recovered faster than those facing a wall. That is not just convenience, that is the body responding to environment as medicine. And so, we must ask, if self is the full unfolding of the self, how can that unfolding occur in spaces that are cramped, fluorescent, overstimulating, or deeply impersonal? The seed does not bloom on concrete. The mind cannot flower under the hum of relentless distraction. The spirit will not sing in a place that feels like someone else's idea of a home. To design for the self, then to cultivate spaces that support becoming, is not luxury, it is care. It is radical in a culture that celebrates speed and external output, to say instead, I will shape my surroundings, not to impress, but to nourish. Let us turn now to simplicity. There is something ancient in the desire for fewer things, for clearer lines, for objects that carry story but not noise. The minimalism of certain traditions, Japanese Zen temples, Scandinavian wooden homes, the desert cells of is not about deprivation, but about clarity. The kind of clarity that allows space for the self to be felt again. When every surface is covered, when every wall shouts for attention, we become dispersed. our focus phrase. But when the room holds space, when emptiness is allowed to exist without apology, we begin to feel not lack, but presence. Presence lives in these empty corners, in the choice of natural light over artificial brightness, in the placement of a single flower in a vase, in a cup of tea drunk slowly at a wooden table. These moments, quiet, unmeasured, often invisible to the world, are where the self begins to recognize its own breath again. The bedroom, in particular, becomes the sanctuary of the soul. Here, the colors matter, the textures matter, the way the bedding feels against your skin, the presence or absence of screens, the rituals before sleep. This is not indulgence, it is biology. The body sleeps better in cool, dark rooms. It heals better when melatonin is not suppressed by blue light. And more than that, the psyche unfurls in spaces that do not judge its unproductiveness. The bedroom says, "You may rest here. You are not being measured now. You are allowed to soften." And then there is nature, not just as scenery, but as co-inhabitant. The presence of plants indoors has been shown to purify air, reduce blood pressure, increase feelings of calm. But beyond metrics, there is something about being near life that reminds us of our own. A fern does not ask for success. A tree does not multitask. And yet they live, they grow, they become, slowly, silently, without explanation. When we bring elements of the natural world into our constructed spaces, wood, stone, water, light, we begin to integrate our modern minds with our ancient bodies, which have always known how to listen to rustling leaves, or to trust the wisdom of firelight. We do not need mansions for this. We do not need wealth. We need attention, intention, a willingness to ask not what the world demands of us, but what our being requires to bloom. For one person, it may be silence. For another, music in the afternoon. For one, a soft wool blanket and dim lamps. For another, a windowsill full of books and sun. There is no formula. There is only listening. This listening is itself an act of self-actualization, to tune in, again and again, to what the inner world longs for, and to give it form in the outer one. The home becomes not a shell, but an extension of the soul. The room becomes a page upon which your daily poem is written, and as you shape these spaces, they shape you. You become someone who moves slower, not out of laziness, but presence. Someone who notices the angle of light at 4 in the afternoon. Someone who lights a candle, not for guests, but for yourself. Someone who folds laundry with care, because care is not reserved only for performance. These small acts are not peripheral. To becoming, they are its essence. And so I invite you, gently, to imagine the spaces you return to daily. Your home, your room, your corner. Ask them, what do they echo back to you? Do they affirm your becoming? Or do they ask you to fragment, to hide, to rush? What would change if you allowed even one part of your space to reflect your becoming self? A rearranged shelf, a cleared table, a single chair by the window that becomes your thinking chair. A color on the wall that feels like truth. You do not need to change everything. Begin with a corner. Make it sacred. Let it reflect your breath, your rhythm, your presence. And as you shape it, watch how the self quietly, gratefully, begins to expand into the space you've made for it. Take one more deep breath. Let the air around you settle like silk. You are not too much. You are not asking for luxury. You are asking for belonging, not to a place, but within yourself. And spaces that honor that belonging will always lead you closer to it. We are all storytellers, even if we never write, even if we never speak the words aloud. Every moment of our lives is shaped, not just by what happens, but by what we believe about what happens. And so much of who we are, or believe ourselves to be, is rooted not in objective reality, but in the stories we tell ourselves about the world, about others, and most profoundly, about ourselves. Self-actualization cannot occur in a mind ruled by an inherited script. To truly become who we are meant to be, we must first become conscious authors of our inner narratives. We must pause, with quiet courage, and ask, what story have I been living inside? And does it still serve the person I am becoming? Imagine, for a moment, That your thoughts, the silent ones that run beneath your everyday awareness, are not facts, but phrases in a book written long ago. A book co-authored by parents, by teachers, by culture, by trauma, by praise, by absence, by love misunderstood, by pain unexplored. These thoughts are not wrong, but neither are they inevitable. Many of them have gone unchallenged for years, repeated so often they feel like truth. You may carry the quiet belief that you are only worthy when you achieve, that rest is laziness, that emotions are dangerous, that you must always be the strong one, that you are too much, or not enough. These are not facts. They are narratives. Ones written during times when you had little power to edit them. But you are no longer powerless now. As we rest here together, you are invited to become not the character in the story, but the writer of it, and with that shift, subtle, sacred, everything changes. The process begins with noticing, not judging, not fixing, just noticing. What are the phrases that echo most often in your mind? Are they kind? Are they curious? Or are they harsh? Rehearsed, almost automatic? And where did they begin? Not to assign blame, but to offer understanding, because the voice inside your mind was never born in a vacuum. It was shaped, which means it can also be reshaped. Consider the science for a moment. Neuroscience teaches us that the brain is plastic. That is, it changes in response to thought and experience. This concept, known as neuroplasticity, means that the more we think of thought, the easier it becomes to think it again. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Which is why old narratives are so sticky, not because they are true, but because they are familiar. But this same principle offers us a way forward. With conscious repetition, with gentleness and practice, we can forge new narratives, and those, too, will become familiar. But rewriting a story is not a loud act. It is not self-help slogans scrawled over pain. It is not denial. It is deeper, slower, more like tending to a neglected garden. First, you clear the weeds, the beliefs that crowd and choke. Then, you test the soil, the values, the truths that remain. And only then do you begin to plant new seeds, not just affirmations, but deeply felt permissions. Permission to change. Permission to rest. Permission to want more. Permission to not know. Permission to be both broken and blooming. Each new story begins not with a sentence, but with a breath. A moment of stillness in which you ask, what if I believed something kinder? You don't need to believe it all at once. You just need to be willing to wonder, what if I am not behind? What if there is nothing wrong with me? What if the things I thought were weaknesses are, in fact, invitations? What if I'm already worthy? These questions do not demand answers. They are keys unlocking doors that were never locked, only forgotten, and slowly, over days, over years, you begin to live differently. Not by changing everything, but by changing the lens through which you see. Therapists and psychologists often speak of something called cognitive reappraisal, the ability to reinterpret an event or belief in a new light. It's not about pretending something didn't hurt. It's about adding new meaning to it. It's about seeing the loss not only as absence, but as space for what came next. It's about understanding that survival was not weakness, but strength, that your sensitivity is not your flaw, but your compass, that your hesitance to trust isn't a failure, it's your body protecting you, and that you can thank it. And begin to write a gentler chapter. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is integration. It is the mature, slow, powerful work of weaving every thread, even the dark ones, into a narrative that holds beauty, complexity, and compassion. There is an old saying, we become the stories we tell ourselves. And if that's true, then let us tell better stories. Not false ones, but ones that allow for growth. Let us tell the story of a person who made mistakes and learned, of someone who grieved and still loved, of someone who was hurt and chose to heal, of someone who doesn't have it all figured out, but keeps showing up, of someone who was not saved, but saved themselves, moment by moment, word by word, breath by breath. Because that story is not just empowering, it is true. Take a moment. Now. In your mind, rewrite one old line. Replace I am a burden with I am allowed to receive. Replace "I must be perfect" with "I am allowed to be human." Replace "no one understands me" with "I am learning to understand myself." These are not lies. They are new beginnings. And beginnings, as you know by now, are sacred. The next time you find yourself caught in old mental loops, try this. Pause. Name the story. Then offer yourself a new one. You do not need to believe it yet. You only need to hold it, like a stone in your hand. Feel its weight. Let it be real. And over time the old stories will soften. They may still visit, but they will no longer run. The house, you will greet them like old guests. Familiar, but no longer in charge. Because the pen is in your hand now, and the story, at last, is yours too, right? Let your breath grow slower. Now, let the silence hold you. You are not your past chapters. You are the author who dares to keep writing, and that, too, is self-actualization. Asterisk, there is a certain misunderstanding that often clouds the path of self-actualization. A stubborn myth woven into modern thought that paints discipline as harshness, as rigidity, as self-denial cloaked in moral superiority. It is imagined as the cold removal of pleasure, the stern face of willpower standing guard over one's baser instincts, and perhaps, in some expressions, that image holds truth. But what if we softened the definition? What if we reshaped our relationship to discipline, not as punishment or repression, but as an expression of profound care? What if, rather than an inner tyrant, discipline was understood as devotion, the quiet, daily sacred tending of the self? To be disciplined, in this reframed light, is not to force oneself into a mold, nor to obey some external ideal of perfection, but rather to build, brick by brick, a life that honors the deeper truths of who we are and who we are becoming. It is not the shout of a drill sergeant echoing in the mind. It is the soft voice that says, "I will show up for myself, even when no one else is watching." Discipline, in its truest form, is the architecture of integrity, a promise kept between you and your unfolding self. Let us begin with the physiology. The brain, for all its wonder, is not a consistent organ. It fluctuates in focus, energy, desire. It is easily distracted, endlessly seduced by novelty, prone to habits both helpful and harmful. In the absence of intention, it follows the path of least resistance, a path that often leads to short-term pleasure at the expense of long-term peace. Discipline, then, becomes the conscious guiding of attention. It is not the suppression of desire, but the gentle steering of energy toward desires that nourish rather than numb. Neuroscience supports this view. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, impulse control, and long-term thinking, strengthens with deliberate practice. Like a muscle, it grows more responsive the more we use it. Habits formed intentionally, with consistency and care, begin to automate, not as rigid routines, but as flows of ease. The discipline required to meditate, to write, to stretch, to eat with attention, to sleep on time. These are not momentary triumphs of grit, but acts of neural sculpting. They are messages to the brain: this is the kind of life I choose to live. And when those messages are repeated with love, not with force or shame, they begin to shape not just behavior, but identity. We begin to see ourselves as someone who is trustworthy, who is aligned, who acts with integrity. And that identity becomes a compass. Not one that yells, but one that gently, persistently orients us toward a life of alignment. Asterisk, but let us not confuse devotion with perfection. There is no final form of discipline, no plateau where you never falter. Real discipline is not linear. It ebbs and flows. It makes space for tiredness. It allows for breaks. It forgives lapses. What matters is not the flawless execution of a rule, but the returning, over and over, to the center you've chosen. That return, that willingness to begin again, is where devotion lives. Let us imagine now a monk in a quiet monastery, rising each morning before dawn, lighting a candle, sitting in meditation. This is discipline, but it is also ritual, and that's the key. Discipline becomes devotion when it is infused with meaning. The act is not performed because it is required, but because it resonates. The candle is lit, not out of fear, but out of reverence. The posture is held, not to impress, but to embody stillness. This, too, can be your life. Not cloistered, perhaps, but sacred in its own way. The morning walk, the evening journal, the cup of tea made slowly, reverently. The daily practice that says, I am here. I am showing up for myself. And just as sacred spaces are designed with care, so too are sacred habits. They do not arrive fully formed. They are built slowly, brick by brick, with patience and compassion. Begin small. Begin where there is already longing, a corner of your life where you crave structure, not as restriction, but as support. Let the practice grow from there. Let it evolve with you. And when it falls away, as all things do, let the return be soft. Let it be a homecoming, not a punishment. Let us also speak of boundaries, not the kind that are erected in fear, but the kind that are drawn in love. A boundary is a discipline of space, a way of protecting what matters. It says, this is the time I reserve for rest. This is the energy I choose not to spend. This is the conversation I will not entertain. These boundaries are not walls. They are gardens. And like gardens, they require tending. They must be clear. They must be maintained. And above all, they must be aligned with your values. Not borrowed from someone else's idea of success, but shaped by your own definition of a meaningful life. And, here again, we return to self-actualization. Because to actualize the self is not to chase an ideal, but to live in alignment, to act in ways that reflect your deepest knowing, to build a life not of reaction, but of resonance and discipline, as devotion becomes the thread that holds this alignment together. It is the practice that keeps your life from scattering. It is the structure that makes freedom possible. Because paradoxically, freedom does not come from chaos, it comes from rhythm. From the soft, sturdy scaffolding of routine. From the container that allows flow to happen. Think of a river. Without banks, it becomes a flood. But with form, it becomes movement. Purpose, life. Discipline is that form, not rigid, but responsive. Not imposed, but chosen. Take a breath here. Reflect for a moment on where your life might long for more structure, not as punishment, not as self-denial, but as self-respect. Where might you show up more consistently, not to prove your worth, but to embody it? Where might a gentle routine anchor you, keep you steady through the winds of change? Where might a simple boundary free your energy for what truly matters? You do not need to overhaul everything. Begin with one thing, one time of day, one habit, one ritual. Let it be small. Let it be sacred. Let it be a gesture of care toward the person you are becoming. Because that is what discipline truly is. Not a whip, but a hand extended. A hand that says, I know what I need. I know what sustains me. I will give it to myself, not once, but again and again, until it becomes part of who I am. And when you falter, because you will let the voice that greets you not be harsh, but kind. Let it say, of course you're tired. Of course you're human. Come back anyway. The path is still here. The practice is waiting. You are always welcome to begin again. This is the discipline that transforms, not by force, but by fidelity. Not by shame, but by love. Not as a means of earning worth, but as a way of honoring it. So tonight, as you lie in this quiet space, let go of the voices that equate discipline with punishment. Listen instead for the voice of devotion, slow, steady, reassuring. Let it guide you, not toward perfection, but toward presence, toward rhythm, toward alignment. You are not failing when you forget. You are not behind when you pause. You are practicing. You are returning. You are becoming. Let your breath deepen. Let your body soften. Self-actualization is often imagined as a solo endeavor. The mountaintop monk, the artist alone in her studio, the philosopher walking beside the sea, thinking, always thinking. And there is truth in that imagery. Solitude has always been the sacred chamber of self-awareness, the space in which the noise of the world falls away and we begin, finally, to hear our own voice, raw, unfiltered, and deeply ours. But the paradox is this: we are not only shaped in solitude, we are shaped in connection. The self does not grow in isolation alone. It is both refined in stillness and revealed in relationship. Let us begin with solitude, not loneliness, not alienation, but true solitude, the chosen, held, intentional space, where one turns inward, not out of rejection, but of reverence. Solitude is where the noise stops. It is where the mirrors vanish, and you are left not with reflections of how others see you, but with the direct presence of your own being. It is not always comfortable. Often it is unnerving. Because to sit alone with oneself is to remove all distractions, all masks, all performances. And what rises in that stillness is not always beautiful, at least not at first. You may find regrets waiting in that silence, or shame, or unmet needs. You may hear the voice of your inner critic growing louder before it finally softens. You may feel restlessness, the pull to check something, fix something, escape into something. This is natural. The modern world has not trained us to be still. It has trained us to respond. But beneath the initial turbulence, solitude holds something sacred. The rediscovery of your inner witness. The part of you that observes without judgment. That remembers who you are beyond roles and reactions. This witness is the first companion on the path of and solitude is where it speaks. There is science here too. Studies in contemplative neuroscience show that time spent in intentional solitude, especially in practices like meditation, journaling, or simply silent reflection, increases activity in the default mode network, the part of the brain associated with self-awareness, moral reasoning, and autobiographical memory. When we are alone with our thoughts, our brains literally begin to organize our inner world, weaving meaning from experience, integrating emotion, and refining identity. This is not passive rest. It is deep processing, like the mind performing its nightly housekeeping, only conscious, chosen, present. But solitude is not the destination. It is the preparation, because after solitude comes the second, equal and necessary force. Connection. If solitude reveals the self, then connection reveals the self in motion. How we mirror, how we react, how we soften or harden in the presence of another. It is one thing to know who you are in the quiet of your own heart. It is another to know who you become in conversation, in intimacy, in conflict, in love. We are relational creatures. The brain is a social organ. From infancy, we are wired to connect, to attune, to belong. Our nervous systems regulate in proximity to others, a phenomenon called co-regulation. When we sit beside someone who is calm, our breath slows. When we share a laugh, our immune function increases. When we are touched with care, oxytocin flows, reducing fear and deepening trust. And when we feel safe, truly safe, we begin to relax into ourselves. We unfold. We show parts of ourselves that solitude alone cannot reach. But not all connection is equal. For a connection to support self-actualization, it must be aligned not with our ego, but with our essence. It must make space for authenticity. It must be rooted in mutual respect. And most of all, it must not require us to shrink. Too often we mistake proximity for intimacy. We remain in relationships that reflect old stories of unworthiness. We perform roles because they feel safe, not because they feel true. But self-actualization demands more. It demands that we ask, not just, who do I become in this relationship? But also, is that who I want to be? The people who walk with us toward our higher selves are not perfect. They may challenge us. They may reflect back truths we resist. But they see us clearly. They do not ask us to be smaller. They do not feed our shame. They hold space for our transformation, sometimes silently, sometimes fiercely. And in their presence, we remember that growth is not a solo act. It is a shared becoming. Let us pause for a moment. Reflect on your own life. Who are the people who make you feel more like yourself? Who sees the version of you that is still unfolding and welcomes it? Who listens without fixing? Who holds without gripping? These are your mirrors. These are your sanctuaries. And just as important, where might you be performing? Where are you shrinking? Where do you feel you must earn love instead of resting in it? These are invitations not to abandon, but to re-examine. To ask whether the connections you nurture are aligned with the self you are becoming. Because just as the right relationship can support self-actualization, the wrong one can delay it. And sometimes, the most loving act is not to hold tighter, but to let go. There is a sacred rhythm between solitude and connection, like the inhale and exhale of the soul. One turns us inward, the other draws us out. Both are necessary. Both are holy, and between them the self grows, not in isolation, not in dependence, but in balance. So tonight, as you rest deeper into this space, allow both truths to hold you. You are enough, even when you are alone. And you are worthy of relationships that reflect your wholeness. Let solitude be your well. Let connection be your river. Let the self drink from both, and let the night remind you that you are never truly separate. Not from the world, not from yourself, not from the quiet. Breathing aliveness that connects everything. Breathe now. Feel the space around you. Wide, tender, silent. You belong. You are becoming. And you are not alone. In the constellation of self-actualization, that quiet unfolding of the self into its fullest, truest form, there are stars that shine more brightly than others. Love, yes. Awareness, yes. Freedom, certainly. But among these is one light, often overlooked, misunderstood, or relegated to childhood whims, or professions of the few. Creativity. Yet creativity is not a luxury. It is not a side effect. It is not the domain only of artists or performers, or poets tucked away in attic rooms. It is something far more essential, something primal, powerful, and profoundly tied to our nature. Creativity is the native language of the soul. To be creative is not merely to make art. It is to make meaning, to translate the internal into the external, to respond to the world not just with thought, but with expression. And this expression, whether it takes the form of a painting, a garden, a dance, a whispered song, or a solution to a quiet household problem, is the self saying, I am here, and I am alive. Creativity, in this way, is not an outcome, but an affirmation, and so, in the architecture of actualization, creativity is not decoration, it is foundation. It is how the self practices being, how the soul stretches its limbs, and discovers what it means to occupy the world. It is not performance, it is presence. Let us start with the science, as always. Because even here, in this most ethereal of domains, the brain has stories to tell. When we engage in creative activity, especially those that immerse us fully, we enter a neurological state known as flow. Described by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, flow is a condition of heightened focus, deep enjoyment, and a sense of timelessness. During flow, the brain's prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for self-criticism and doubt, actually becomes less active. In this temporary suspension, the inner editor goes quiet, and we are left with a purer experience of self, not thinking about doing, but simply doing. Creating from this place is not effortful. It is ecstatic. It is whole. This state doesn't require brilliance. It doesn't require mastery. It only requires engagement, a willingness to enter the moment completely, to surrender to the unfolding of something new, something unplanned. That is the essence of creativity. Not control, but surrender. Not perfection, but play. And this, perhaps, is why creativity is such a powerful agent of self-actualization, because it bypasses the conditioned mind. It slips past the stories we carry about what is acceptable, what is realistic, what is worthy. It allows the self to express itself directly, raw, unfiltered, alive. It says, I will make something, not because it will succeed, but because it wants to exist. Now consider the way a child draws. They do not hesitate. They do not pause to compare. They do not wonder if it is good. They simply move crayon to paper, hand to air, humming as they go. They are not making a masterpiece. They are making themselves visible. And that is the heart of it. Creativity, especially when done without an audience, is a practice of self. It is a mirror not held by others, but carved by the self, for the self. And in that mirror, we see not just what we are, but what we might be. Potential glimpsed in the lines of a poem, in the curve of a sculpture, in the rhythm of a recipe, passed through generations. Even in the most humble acts, rearranging a room, choosing clothes with intention, telling a story at dinner, humming a tune under breath. We are shaping experience into expression, and each act, no matter how small, whispers to the self, "You matter enough to shape the world around you." There is also the healing power of creativity, the way it allows us to process what cannot yet be spoken. Trauma researchers have long acknowledged the value of expressive arts in helping individuals navigate and integrate difficult emotions. The body often remembers what the mind cannot articulate, and in painting or movement or melody, that memory is given space to exist without needing to explain itself. This is creativity as catharsis, as witness, as release, and sometimes as resurrection. Because in creating, we do not only express who we are, we rebuild it. We take the broken pieces and, without always knowing why, arrange them into something whole. And in doing so, we become whole. Let us also speak of creativity as meaning-making. Viktor Frankl, the existential psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote that human beings are not driven by pleasure or power, but by the search for meaning. And meaning, like creativity, is not found, it is made, moment by moment, choice by choice, creation by creation. When we make something, anything, we are saying this moment is not random, it matters. We are saying, I am capable of shaping experience into form. We are saying, the void does not win. This is why self-actualized individuals are often quietly creative. Not necessarily famous, not necessarily productive in the capitalist sense, but engaged. They are curious, they experiment, they keep a notebook, they tinker, they ask what if, not because they need an answer, but because the question itself is alive. And yet, creativity is often the first thing we abandon when life becomes overwhelming. We tell ourselves it's not important, that it's not practical, that it's indulgent, that it can wait. But creativity is not extra. It is essential. It is how the soul breathes, and like breath, it need not be grand to be vital. You do not need to write a novel. You do not need to sell paintings. You need only to make space. 10 minutes, one line, a single color on a blank page. Create, not for applause, but for intimacy. For the relationship between your inner world and the outer one. Because every time you create, you are reminding yourself, I am still here. I still matter. I still have something to say. Take a breath now. Let your thoughts drift, like leaves on a quiet stream. Remember something you once made, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. How did it feel? What part of you did it awaken? And now, ask, where in my life have I gone silent? Where might creativity be waiting, quietly, to return? Because it will return. It is patient. It is faithful. It lives just beneath the surface of doing, waiting only for permission, and that permission is yours to give. Tonight, as the world sleeps, allow yourself this thought, that creativity is not outside of you. It is you. It is your soul in motion. It is the dance between presence and possibility. It is the most honest conversation you will ever have with the universe. So begin again, even now. Not with pressure, not with a plan, but with a question, a color, a sound, a movement, a breath. Let it rise. Let it speak. Let it shape the silence into something that was never there before, except inside of you, waiting, because this, too, is self-actualization, not a goal. A gesture, asterisk. We have spoken so far of many parts of self-actualization, of self-awareness, of discipline, of solitude and connection, of creativity blooming from the soul, like spring rising from soil. But there is another element still. Quiet, and often misunderstood. A presence that hovers just behind the choices we make, the things we build, the lives we live. And that is legacy. The word itself often evokes images of grandness, the legacies of leaders, of saints, of artists, whose names echo through centuries. We think of statues and books, of foundations and memorials. But these are only the loudest legacies, the visible ones. And while they matter, they are not the only kind. Most legacies are quieter, softer, less about what you leave behind in stone or on paper, and more about what you leave behind in people, in places, in the air itself. What is legacy, really? It is the imprint of your presence, not what you accomplished, but how you lived. It is the accumulation of your attention, your kindness, your effort, your being. It is the scent left in a room after someone has gone. Not literal, but emotional. It is the echo of who you were, carried forward in the lives of others. And more than anything, legacy is a consequence of alignment. When you live close to your truth, when your inner values match your outer actions, you shape the world around you, not by trying, but simply by being. You become a tuning fork. Others feel it. They may not name it, but they respond to it. They shift around it. They remember it. And in that memory, you continue. Legacy is not performance. It is resonance. It is not created by being impressive. It is created by being present. And it begins long before you are gone. Let us look to the science. Psychologists have long studied the idea of generativity, a term introduced by Erik Erikson in his theory of psychosocial development. Generativity, he wrote, is the stage of life where individuals begin to invest energy in things that will outlast them. Children, ideas, projects, communities. It is the desire to nurture, to guide, to contribute. And what's profound is that people who experience high levels of generativity report not just greater satisfaction in later life, but deeper meaning throughout it. They are not necessarily more accomplished. They are simply more connected to a sense that their life matters. Beyond themselves, this too is part of self-actualization. To know that your life is not an isolated event, but part of a larger fabric. That the choices you make, the love you offer, the wisdom you pass on, ripple outward in ways you cannot fully see. Legacy is not the province of the old. It is not something to consider only when time grows short. It is happening already, now, in this moment, with every interaction, with every decision. You are shaping the world, not in some abstract way, but in the minds of those you touch, in the way you listen, in the way you walk through your days. Imagine this: a teacher who speaks with kindness instead of anger, a neighbor who checks in on someone lonely, a friend who forgives, a stranger who smiles. None of these acts will be written in history books, but each of them is a legacy, a piece of presence passed forward, a moment that alters the trajectory of another life, however subtly, however briefly. And so the question becomes, not what will I leave behind when I die, but rather, what am I leaving behind right now, in every room I enter? There is a kind of wisdom that comes when we think of ourselves as part of a continuum, not the center of a story, but one strand in a great woven tapestry. This shift is humbling, but it is also freeing, because once we let go of the idea that legacy must be large, we are freed to make it loving. Once we let go of the idea that legacy must be lasting, we are freed to make it immediate. And once we let go of the idea that legacy must be remembered, we are freed to make it true. Let us speak, too, of the legacies we inherit. Because part of self-actualization is reckoning with what has been handed to us, the stories, patterns, beliefs, and wounds that have traveled through families, cultures, and histories to arrive in us. Some of these legacies are beautiful: a mother's laughter, a grandfather's resilience, a tradition carried like a flame, and some are painful cycles of silence, shame, or scarcity. To actualize the self is not to erase these legacies, but to meet them with awareness. To ask, what am I carrying that is not mine? What will I pass on, and what will I put down? This too is legacy. Not just what you leave, but what you choose not to leave. And sometimes, the most powerful legacy is to say, the pattern stops with me. Legacy can also be traced in the small, material things: the mug passed from one hand to another, the letter kept in a drawer, the photograph faded, but held. These things do not matter for their value. They matter for their meaning. They are tokens of presence, proof that a person lived, that they touched the world, that they left something behind that someone else could touch, to dot. And so you need not build empires. You need not be famous. You need only be fully here, and the world will be changed by your presence. Take a breath. Reflect on someone who left an imprint on you, not through achievement, but through presence. What did they offer? How did they live? What stayed with you? And now ask yourself, what do I offer? How do I live? What will stay with others when I am not in the room? These questions are not meant to burden. They are meant to illuminate. You are already leaving a legacy, every day, every moment. The way you speak, the way you notice, the way you forgive, the way you return. It all matters tonight. As the hush settles deeper around you, let go of the need to be impressive. Let go of the myth that you must accomplish something massive in order to matter. Instead, feel the soft power of presence. Let your legacy be this breath. Let it be this kindness. Let it be this decision to live aligned with what is most true in you. Because in the end, self-actualization is not only about becoming, it is about belonging to time, to others, to meaning itself, and legacy. It is just the trace your soul leaves in the world. Long after your footsteps have faded from the floor, breathe, rest. You are enough. You are already leaving beauty behind. Asterisk, if you've come this far into the night, into the inward spiraling corridors of the self, then you know, somewhere beneath the surface, whether gently or sharply, that self-actualization is not only built from joy, from clarity, from sunlight. It is also shaped by loss. It is sculpted by what we let go of, by what is taken, by the aching absences that rearrange our interiors forever. This is not often spoken aloud in simple language, but it is known, deeply known. To be human is to grieve, and to grieve is in its own way to grow. Grief is not a mistake in the system. It is the system. It is what love becomes when the form of that love can no longer be held. It is the echo of connection, the phantom limb of what mattered. And though we may resist it, deny it, rush through it, grief does not vanish. It waits. And in its waiting, it becomes one of the most powerful agents of transformation the soul can know. Let us move gently now, through this dark forest. Let us not fear it, because there is gold here. Not the kind that shines, but the kind that warms from the inside out. The kind that can only be found in silence, in surrender, in the long, slow descent into truth. Grief, from a biological perspective, is both natural and necessary. When we lose something, a person, a role, a home, a version of ourselves, the brain initiates a series of responses not unlike trauma. The amygdala becomes hyperactive. The prefrontal cortex struggles to regulate. Sleep patterns change. The immune system weakens. Appetite fluctuates. Time distorts. And yet, something else happens. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, new neural pathways begin to form. The brain begins to remap itself around the absence. This doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean replacing. It means adapting, integrating, becoming a new version of the self that includes the loss, rather than erasing it. This process is sometimes called post-traumatic growth. It refers to the ways in which individuals, after significant emotional suffering, develop deeper compassion, greater wisdom, more profound gratitude, and a stronger sense of purpose. But this growth does not come quickly. It does not come easily. It comes like moss on a stone, slow, quiet, inevitable only if the conditions allow. And the condition that matters most is presence, the willingness to feel fully, without rushing away. Let us consider a metaphor. Grief is like winter. It comes uninvited. It strips the trees bare. It silences the birds. It hardens the ground, and yet, beneath the frozen soil, something begins. Something that cannot be seen. Roots deepen. Seeds lie waiting. The earth rests not in death, but in dormant preparation. And when spring arrives, not all at once, but in shy, slow moments, it does not erase winter. It emerges through it. So too with grief. You do not move on from loss. You move with it. You carry it like a stone. Sometimes sharp, sometimes smooth, sometimes invisible to others, but always there. And if you let it, if you allow it to be part of you without shame or resistance, that stone becomes something more than weight. It becomes shape. It becomes the container of your becoming. There is a kind of intimacy in grief that nothing else matches. It strips away illusion. It tells you what matters. It rearranges priorities with ruthless clarity. When you have grieved, truly grieved, you cannot go back to shallow living. You cannot pretend that time is unlimited. You cannot ignore your own vulnerability, or the beauty that pulses through ordinary moments. You begin to see differently. You notice the way someone's voice catches in a story. You feel the texture of light on your skin. You pause longer in conversations. You say "I love you" more often. You apologize with less resistance. You forgive without being asked. Not because you are saintly, but because you are aware. Because you have learned, through loss, what it means to love with the full knowledge that everything is temporary, and still choose to love anyway. This is one of the highest forms of self-actualization. To love, knowing it will end. To live, knowing it will end. To show up anyway. To stay open. Let us pause, breathe, reflect, gently. What have you lost that changed you, not only in pain, but in shape? What did you learn that you could not have learned in any other way? What softened in you? What sharpened? What remains? This is not to glorify grief. It is not to say it is good. It is to say it is real, and in its realness, it deserves space. It deserves to be part of the conversation about the self, about growth, about what it means to live fully and become whole. Some traditions speak of grief as a teacher, a wise and terrible guide who leads you through shadowlands you never meant to enter. You walk barefoot, you get lost, you sit in the dark, and then, one day, you realize you are not the same. You are gentler now. You are stronger now. You are more yourself. Because grief, though brutal, does not destroy the self. It reveals it. And so, in the architecture of grief is not a flaw in the foundation. It is a pillar. It teaches humility. It teaches perspective. It teaches compassion, not as concept, but as lived truth. And most of all, it teaches presence. Because when you have known loss, you no longer take the moment for granted. You understand deeply that this breath, this face, this chance will not come again. And so you live more fully, not recklessly, not frantically, but intentionally. You begin to write the story of your life, not from fear, but from reverence. And in that shift you grow. You actualize. You become. Take another breath now. Feel the stillness around you. Feel what it holds. Perhaps there is sorrow in you tonight, old or new, clear or nameless. Let it be here. Let it rest beside you, not as enemy, but as companion. You need not understand it. You need not solve it. You need only let it speak, softly, slowly, in the language of memory and truth. It has something to teach you, and you are strong enough to listen. In the quiet aftermath of grief, another shape begins to form, at first vague, soft-edged, difficult to define. It is not a feeling, exactly, but a threshold, a quiet offer, a door that waits to be opened, not by force, but by readiness. This is the domain of forgiveness. Forgiveness, like grief, is a word we think we understand. A word so often wrapped in moral instruction, in cultural demand, in spiritual idealism. We are told to forgive quickly, easily, completely. We are told that forgiveness is virtuous, that it frees the soul, that it is the right thing to do, and perhaps it is all those things. But here, in the slow unfolding of self-actualization, we must ask something more honest, something deeper. What is forgiveness, truly, quietly, and wholly? Is it a gift, a release, a return? Or is it something else entirely, something older, more sacred, more personal? Let us begin, as always, with what is true of the body, the landscape of the self we can see, measure, understand. Unforgiven harm, whether done to us or by us, lodges in the nervous system like static. It becomes a closed loop, a circuit of recurring thought, emotion, and tension. The mind replays. The heart constricts. The body remembers. Over time, this loop becomes not only psychological, but physical. Cortisol levels remain elevated. Sleep becomes shallow. The immune system becomes taxed. We begin to armor ourselves, sometimes without knowing it, against pain that has already passed but is still very much alive inside us. And so, forgiveness, from a physiological point of view, is not just about morality. It is about liberation. It is the unspooling of that loop. It is the nervous system finally sighing in relief. It is the body letting go of a story it was never meant to hold forever. But this letting go is not easy, nor should it be rushed. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. It is not the same as excusing. It is not the same as trusting again. These are all different processes, with different rhythms, and none should be conflated. Forgiveness is something else. It is the quiet decision to no longer carry the weight of resentment, to no longer allow the wound to define the self, to no longer grant the past the power to dictate the future. It is, in essence, an act of reclamation, and often, it begins not with the other, but with the self. Pause now, breathe, turn your gaze inward. Consider the small, invisible burdens you may still carry, words not said, apologies not received, betrayals unhealed. These may not shout, they may whisper. They may sit in corners of the heart you rarely enter, but you know they are there. You know because, sometimes, when you try to move forward, they pull. When you try to rest, they stir, and when you dream of becoming, of truly stepping into your full self, they doubt. These are the marks of unforgiven pain. They are not your fault, but they are now your companions. And forgiveness, if and when you are ready, is the way you say, "You may rest now. You do not need to come with me. I will go on." The psychology of forgiveness has revealed powerful things. Studies by researchers, like Everett Worthington and Frederick Luskin, have shown that those who practice forgiveness, whether toward others or themselves, experience lower levels of depression, anxiety, and anger. They sleep more soundly. They feel more connected. Their lives feel more meaningful. But what is perhaps most fascinating is that forgiveness does not require contact with the person who caused the pain. It does not require apology. It does not require agreement. It does not require time travel. Forgiveness is internal. It is something done not for the other, but for yourself. Because to forgive is to say, I will no longer give this wound my power. I will no longer center my story around this harm. I will write a new chapter, and this time, I will be the author. This is why forgiveness and self-actualization are intertwined. Because to truly become, you must let go of what you are not, an unforgiven pain, though it once protected you, though it may have defined you, is not who you are. You are not your betrayal. You are not your loss. You are not your wound. You are the one who survived it, the one who still dreams, the one who still loves. Forgiveness is how you make space for that love again, not naive, not boundless, but true. It is how you say, yes, this happened, but it will not be the shape of me forever. And let us speak now of the hardest forgiveness of all, the forgiveness of the self, for the things not done, the words not spoken, the times we failed to live up to who we hoped we were. This is a quiet ache, often unnoticed, but constant. And yet, until we learn to forgive ourselves, our journey toward wholeness remains incomplete. To forgive yourself is not to excuse, it is to acknowledge, to learn, to hold gently what once was hard, and then to continue, because you are not static, you are a verb, you are changing even now. And forgiveness is the bridge between who you were and who you are still becoming. Take another breath. You need not forgive tonight. You need only understand that forgiveness is possible, that it is not weakness. It is not surrender. It is sovereignty. It is the decision to no longer shape your identity around pain, and in that decision, something opens, a light, a softness, a beginning. So let it begin, slowly. Write the letter you do not send. Speak the words into an empty room. Picture the wound, and then picture it softened. Release not the memory, but the grip of it, and step forward. Not away from your past, but toward a self that is no longer ruled by it. This is forgiveness. This is freedom. This is how you open the next door in the long, sacred corridor of your own unfolding. Asterisk, so we arrive here, together, at the quiet edge of all we have explored. We began with a question. What is self-actualization, really? Not as a demand for a final answer, but as an invitation. A soft knocking at the door of the interior world. Along the way, we stepped into chambers, often locked or overlooked, the roots of childhood. The art of awareness, the slow rhythm of discipline, the serenity of solitude, the wild spark of creativity, the healing in grief, the release of forgiveness. We wandered through forests of science, rivers of story, mountains of feeling. And now, standing here at the threshold of conclusion, we understand something essential. Self-actualization is not a destination. It is a direction, a way of walking, a way of being, a posture of presence in the unfolding moment. There is no final form of you to become. There is only the continual becoming. This realization, though simple, is profound. It unburdens, it softens the chase. It replaces striving with returning to what is most natural, most true, most present in you, when all masks are set aside. You are not here to become someone else. You are here to remember who you already are, and in remembering, to shape that essence, to refine it gently, patiently, with the grace of time and the wisdom of experience, until it becomes not perfect, but true. The myth of self-actualization is that it is grand, a thunderclap, a transformation so total that life is divided into before and after. But the truth, like most truths, is quieter. Self-actualization is not a leap. It is a series of returns, to your breath, to your values, to the things that bring aliveness, and the things that ask you to release. It is noticing what dims your light, and choosing, without drama, to step toward what restores it. It is knowing that you cannot control everything, but that you can choose your response. It is letting go of the image of who you thought you should be, and becoming deeply intimate with who you already are. Beneath the layers of performance, protection, and projection, and perhaps, most beautifully, it is learning to love that self, not as a project, but as a presence. Not when it achieves, not when it is praised, but always, especially in silence, especially in stillness, especially now. Let us pause here, not as an end, but as a landing. Take a breath in through the nose, and out through the mouth. Notice how the body responds to softness, to kindness, to the permission to simply be. In this breath, there is no performance, no role to play, no ladder to climb. There is only now. There is only you, not the imagined you, but the breathing one, and that is more than enough. So what now? What do you do with all this knowledge, all this reflection, all this gentle excavation of the self? Perhaps nothing at all. Perhaps you sleep. Perhaps you carry one line from this long journey and tuck it away in your chest, letting it warm you when the days grow hard. Or perhaps slowly, you begin to make changes, not because you must, but because something in you is ready. To rest more deeply, to listen more often, to live more honestly, to love more freely, beginning always with yourself. Because self-actualization, in the end, is not about reaching the top of some inner mountain. It is about learning to live, fully and awake, exactly where you are. It is about seeing your own life as sacred, not because it is dramatic or flawless, but because it is yours, unreplaceable, utterly alive. In many ancient traditions, the self is not seen as something to be created, but something to be uncovered, like a sculpture waiting beneath the stone, revealed by the slow, deliberate work of chisel and care. This is your work, not to invent who you are, but to meet who you have always been, to honor the quiet wisdom already within, to hold the mirror not with critique, but with reverence, and in doing so, to become someone who does not just survive this life, but inhabits it, animates it, shapes it gently with the soft gravity of presence. This, at last, is the answer we have arrived at, not with urgency, but with stillness. Self-actualization is the lifelong act of being yourself, deeply and deliberately, in a world that often asks you to be something else. And that act, quiet as it may be, is a revolution. As we close, let this not be goodbye, but a resting place. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts soften. Let your body receive the night like a blessing, and let this final truth settle in you, like warm light. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not broken. You are unfolding, at exactly your own pace. And that unfolding is beautiful. Breathe now, rest now, and when morning comes, rise not with pressure, but with possibility. The journey does not end here. It simply begins again, within you, always within you. Good night, and thank you for walking this path with me.